The stars looked peaceful through the window of the medical ship. Captain Lee Minyu stood on the bridge, watching the distant planet grow larger on the screens. His ship, the Sanctuary, was painted white with large red crosses on every side. Everyone in space knew what those symbols meant. They meant doctors. They meant safety. They meant no weapons. Minyu had been a medical ship captain for 8 years. He had seen many battles but never fought in one. That was not his job. His job was to save lives after the fighting stopped. The Galactic Coalition had strict rules about this. Medical ships were protected. No one was allowed to attack them. It was the most important rule in space warfare. "Captain, we're receiving the distress signal again," said Lieutenant from his station. He was the security officer, though security on a medical ship mostly meant checking supplies and making sure patients didn't fight each other. "The battle at 4 has wounded from both sides." Minyu nodded. "How long until we arrive?" 3 hours, sir." In the medical bay below, Dr. Park was preparing her team. She moved between the rows of empty beds, checking equipment. Her hands moved quickly, professionally. She had joined the medical corps because she believed in helping people. All people, even enemies. "Nurse, are the surgical units ready?" she asked. Nurse looked up from her checklist and smiled. "Yes, doctor. All 6 units are prepared. We have supplies for at least 500 patients." Nodded. "Good. This battle has been going on for 2 days. There will be many wounded." The conflict at 4 was between coalition forces and the Empire. There were aggressive warriors who wanted to expand their territory. They had attacked a coalition mining colony. The coalition had sent ships to defend it. Now, hundreds of soldiers on both sides needed medical help. Arranged bandages and medicines on sterile trays. She had been a nurse for only 2 years, but she was good at her job. She believed, like Dr. Park, that every life mattered. It didn't matter which side someone fought for. Pain was pain. Death was death. 3 hours later, the Sanctuary dropped out of faster-than-light travel near 4. The planet was brown and rocky, with 2 small moons. Around it, pieces of destroyed spaceships floated in the darkness. Some were coalition vessels. Others belonged to the "Broadcasting medical status on all frequencies," announced the communications officer. "All ships are being of our non-combatant presence." Captain Minyu watched the tactical display. He could see the remaining warships holding their positions. The battle had paused. Both sides were regrouping. This was when medical ships did their work. "Captain, we're being hailed by the coalition flagship," said Lieutenant. "Put them through." A tired-looking coalition admiral appeared on the screen. "Sanctuary, thank you for responding. We have 200 wounded on the surface and another 100 on our ships. They have also signaled that they have casualties." "We'll treat everyone, Admiral," Minyu said calmly. "That's what we do." The Admiral nodded. "Be careful, Captain. The commander is not like their usual officers. He's aggressive, unpredictable." "We're a medical ship, Admiral. We're protected under coalition law." "I know, just be careful." The Sanctuary moved into orbit around 4. Shuttles began launching, heading down to the planet's surface. Dr. Park was on the first shuttle with her team. They landed near a coalition field hospital that was overflowing with wounded soldiers. The work began immediately, and her team moved through the rows of injured soldiers, treating the worst cases first. Burns, broken bones, radiation exposure. She had seen it all before. Her hands never shook. Her voice stayed calm. "This one needs surgery now," she told, pointing to a young soldier with severe internal injuries. "Prep him for transport to the ship." Nodded and called for the stretcher team. On the other side of the battlefield, another shuttle had landed near the positions. The soldiers were suspicious at first. They pointed weapons at the human doctors, but when they saw the medical symbols and realized these humans were unarmed, they lowered their guns. The human doctors treated wounded just as carefully as they treated coalition soldiers. This was the way of the medical corps. No sides, no enemies, only patience. Back on the sanctuary, Captain Minu received reports from all the shuttle teams. Everything was proceeding normally. Wounded soldiers from both sides were being brought to the ship. The medical bays were filling up, but they had enough space and supplies. Then Lieutenant's console beeped urgently. "Captain, I'm detecting weapons charging on the flagship." Minu frowned. "That's odd, the battle is paused. Are they targeting the coalition ships?" His face went pale. "No, sir, they're targeting us." For a moment, Minu couldn't process what he was hearing. "That's impossible. We're a medical ship. Broadcast our status again. They must have made a mistake." "Broadcasting now, sir. All frequencies, all languages." The communications officer turned to Minu with fear in his eyes. "Captain, the flagship is responding, says. He says medical ships are weakness. He says helping enemies is foolish." Minu's blood went cold. "Raise shields. Get me the coalition flagship now." But there wasn't enough time. The first energy blast hit the sanctuary's port side, tearing through the shield generators. The ship shuddered violently. Alarms screamed throughout the corridors. "Shields down," shouted. "Multiple impacts. They're targeting our engines." On the medical deck, Dr. Park grabbed onto a bed as the ship shook. Around her, patients were crying out in fear. Some of the wounded tried to get up, panicking. "Everyone stay calm," she shouted. But even as she said it, she knew something was terribly wrong. Medical ships didn't get attacked. It was impossible. It was against every law of war. Another blast hit the ship. This time, it struck the medical bay directly. The explosion tore through 3 decks. Dr. Park had just enough time to push Nurse toward the door before the ceiling collapsed. Captain Minu was thrown from his chair as the bridge exploded around him. Through the smoke and flames, he could see Lieutenant frantically working his console, trying to launch the escape pods. "Get everyone off the ship," Minu ordered. "Emergency evacuation." But they weren't done. Their ships moved closer, targeting the escape pods as they launched. Small, defenseless pods were blown apart before they could get clear of the dying medical ship. Managed to get one last message out before the communications array was destroyed. It was a simple transmission, but it included everything. Video recordings from the ship's cameras, audio of words, proof of what was happening. The message went out on all frequencies, faster than light, spreading across the galaxy. The sanctuary broke apart 17 minutes after the first attack. Of the 870 crew members, only 23 survived. They floated in space in the few escape pods that had made it clear, watching the pieces of their ship drift away. Lieutenant was in one of those pods. So was Nurse, burned and crying. Captain Lee Minu was not. Neither was Dr. Park. They had stayed at their posts until the end, trying to save others. As the survivors waited for rescue, the message from the sanctuary reached Earth. It reached the Coalition Council. It reached every civilized world in the galaxy. Everyone saw what had happened. Everyone saw the war crime. And on Earth, deep in secret facilities, old soldiers in old cells began to hear footsteps coming down long, quiet hallways. The Galactic Coalition Council chamber was built to inspire peace. Its walls were made of transparent crystal that showed the stars beyond. Representatives from 47 different species sat in a circle, all equal, all committed to civilized behavior in the galaxy. Today, the chamber felt cold. Ambassador Han sat in the human delegation area, watching the video play for the 3rd time. On the massive holographic display in the center of the room, the sanctuary died again. Medical personnel screamed. Escape pods exploded. The white ship with its red crosses broke into pieces. Around the circle, alien representatives made sounds of distress. Some covered their eyes. Others shook their heads. The delegate from actually vomited into a container. When the video ended, Council Prime stood. She was tall and blue, from a species that had never known war on their home planet. Her voice was soft, sad. "This is unacceptable," she said. "The Empire has committed a grave violation of coalition law. We must respond with economic sanctions immediately, trade embargoes, diplomatic isolation." Several delegates nodded in agreement. They began discussing which trade routes to close, which diplomatic channels to freeze. Ambassador Han stood up. He was older than most human diplomats, with gray hair and deep lines in his face. He had fought in Earth's last global war before humanity unified. He remembered what real war looked like. "With respect, Council Prime," he said quietly, "Earth votes against sanctions." The chamber went silent. All eyes turned to the human delegation. "Ambassador Han," said carefully, "surely you want justice for your people." "We do," Han replied. "That's why we're voting against sanctions." He paused, "because sanctions won't be enough." Admiral stood beside Han. She was younger, colder, with sharp eyes that had seen many battles. She commanded Earth's first fleet, the largest military force humanity had in space. "They attacked our medical personnel," Admiral said. Her voice was ice. "They targeted doctors and nurses. They destroyed escape pods carrying wounded patients. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a mistake." Stated clearly that he considered medical assistance to be weakness. "Yes," agreed, "which is why we must show him the strength of our economic power." "No," Han interrupted. "We tried your way, we followed your rules, we painted our ships white, we broadcast our non-combatant status, we carried no weapons, and they killed our healers anyway." He pulled out a small data pad and held it up. "Earth is formally invoking Article 7 of the Human Integration Treaty, the right to withdraw from coalition military restrictions in cases of war crimes against protected personnel." The chamber erupted. Delegates stood, shouting in dozens of languages. Some demanded explanations. Others protested. A few looked confused. Raised her hands for silence. "Ambassador Han, please reconsider. The coalition has maintained peace for 300 years by following our protocols. Military escalation will only—" "Council Prime," Han said, and his voice was harder now, "let me tell you about Earth's protocols." He gestured and another video began playing. But this one wasn't from space. It was from Earth's history. Old footage in black and white showing human soldiers liberating prison camps, then courtrooms, trials, men in uniform standing before judges. "After our most terrible war," Han explained, "humanity created rules. The Geneva Conventions, the Hague Conventions, rules about how to fight, rules about what you cannot do even to enemies." He paused. "And most importantly, rules about what happens when those rules are broken." The video showed more trials, more judgments, more sentences. "We had a word for people who violated these rules," Han continued. "War criminals, and we hunted them down. We put them on trial. We showed the whole world that breaking the rules of war would bring justice." General Nam stepped forward. He was huge for a human, with scars on his face and hands. He looked like he had been built for war. "But we also learned something else," the general said. "We learned that some methods of war were too effective, too brutal, too terrible to use against any enemy who followed the rules." He looked around the chamber. "So we made those methods illegal. We locked away the soldiers who used them. We called them criminals and promised we would never use such tactics again." "That's good," said the delegate from uncertainly. "It was good," agreed General Nam, "as long as our enemies followed the rules too." Doctor was the last human to stand. She was a historian, small and quiet, wearing simple glasses. She didn't look dangerous, but when she spoke, her words made the entire chamber feel cold. "For 200 years, we've kept them locked away," she said. 50,000 men and women who won battles but violated the rules of war. Some destroyed cities. Others used psychological warfare so effective it drove entire populations insane. A few developed weapons we banned because they were too cruel. She pulled up files on the holographic display, service records, criminal records, thousands of pages of documentation. We imprisoned them, not because they lost battles, but because they won them too well, because they did things that civilized society could not accept. She looked directly at Council Prime, but they have shown us that they are not civilized. They attacked medical personnel. They targeted healers. They spat on every rule of war that makes us different from animals. "So what are you saying?" whispered. Admiral stepped forward again. "We're saying that for 2 centuries we've fought your way, clean, civilized, following rules that we created to protect life." Her eyes were hard. "But you can only follow rules with an opponent who also follows rules. They made their choice. Now we'll make ours." "What choice?" demanded the delegate from. "We're releasing the penal legions," said General Nam simply. The chamber erupted again, but this time with fear. Some delegates had studied human history. They knew what this meant. His blue skin had gone pale. "General, please. Your own species deemed these soldiers too dangerous. You locked them away for crimes against humanity. How can you possibly—" "Because," Han interrupted, "they committed crimes against humans, against people who followed the rules of war. They have shown they don't care about rules. So we're sending them people who are very, very good at fighting without rules." He brought up more video. This time it showed human soldiers doing terrible things, cities burning, enemies surrendering and being tricked, psychological warfare that left survivors unable to function, tactics so brutal that even other humans had turned away in disgust. "These are the methods we banned," Doctor said softly. "These are the soldiers we imprisoned. We told you when we joined the coalition that humanity had darkness in its past, that we had learned to be better. You nodded and welcomed us." She paused. "What we didn't tell you is that we didn't erase that darkness. We just locked it away. And now they have given us permission to open that door." "This is insane," shouted a delegate. "You'll become the monsters you claim to fight against." "No," Admiral said coldly. "We'll become the monsters we were when we fought each other. The difference is, we know how to control it. We know when to stop. They are about to learn what happens when they force humanity to stop pretending to be civilized." Was shaking. "I beg you, Ambassador, reconsider, use our sanctions, give diplomacy a chance." Han looked at her with something like pity. "Council Prime, your species never had a world war. You never had to learn what total war means. You never had to create rules to limit war because your wars were never unlimited." He straightened his uniform. "Humanity did. We learned these lessons in blood. Millions of deaths taught us why we need rules, and billions more taught us what happens when someone breaks them." "We're not asking for permission," General Nam added. "We're informing you as a courtesy. Earth's first fleet will arrive at the border in 6 days. The penal legions will be deployed immediately after." "And what are your objectives?" asked Weekly. "Total surrender," Admiral said. "They will hand over every officer involved in the attack on the sanctuary. Will stand trial. Their military will be dismantled. They will never threaten a medical ship again." "And if they refuse?" Admiral smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Then the galaxy will remember why humanity created rules of war in the first place. They'll remember what we're capable of when those rules don't apply." The vote was called. Earth's motion to withdraw from military restrictions passed because it didn't require Council approval. It was already in the treaty they had signed decades ago. The Coalition had never thought humanity would use it. As the Council chamber emptied, Lieutenant and Nurse watched from the visitor gallery. They were the senior surviving members of the sanctuary. They had been asked to testify, but their testimony hadn't been needed. The video spoke for itself. "Is this what we wanted?" asked quietly. Her burns were still healing. She had nightmares every night. Looked at his hands. He had been a security officer on a medical ship. He had never fired a shot in combat. "I don't know," he admitted. "But Dr. Park died trying to save people. Captain Minu died at his post. 847 of our crew died because they were healers." He looked at. "Someone has to answer for that." "But these Penal Legion soldiers, they're criminals." "Yes," agreed. "Our criminals, and now they're going to do what criminals do best. They're going to break every rule. The difference is this time we're asking them to." On Earth, in maximum security facilities scattered across the planet, cell doors were opening. Men and women who had been locked away for decades were stepping into the light. Some were old. Others had been imprisoned young and grown old in their cells. They all had one thing in common. They were all very, very good at war. The kind of war that civilized people didn't want to think about. And now they were being given one chance at redemption. One chance to use their terrible skills for something other than their own glory. One chance to make the galaxy understand why humanity had locked them away in the first place. The prison was deep underground, built into solid rock beneath the Pacific Ocean. It had no name, only a number, Facility 7. For 200 years, its cells had held people that the rest of humanity wanted to forget. Colonel heard the footsteps before he saw the guards. He had been in his cell for 38 years. In that time, guards had come 3 times a day with food, once a week with clean clothes, and once a month with medical checks. The footsteps always sounded the same. These footsteps were different, faster, more urgent. The door to his cell opened. Not the small slot for food, but the entire door. Couldn't remember the last time that door had opened fully. He sat on his bed and waited. Patience was something he had learned in prison. "Colonel," said the officer standing in the doorway. She wore the uniform of Earth's Defense Forces, with the rank of major. "Do you know why you were imprisoned?" Smiled without humor. "I won a war using methods that civilized people found disturbing. Specifically, I destroyed 12 cities, killed 40,000 enemy soldiers, broke their will to fight so completely that they surrendered unconditionally." He paused. "But I also killed 8,000 civilians, not by accident. I chose targets that would terrify the enemy. I made them afraid to fight us." The major nodded. "That's why you were convicted. That's why you've been here for 38 years. "Yes." "How would you like to get out?" Stood slowly. He was 60 years old now, but still strong. Prison had kept him fit. "What's the price?" "One mission. You'll command a penal legion. 50,000 soldiers, all like you, all convicted of war crimes. You'll fight an enemy that attacked one of our medical ships, killed 847 doctors and nurses." His eyes narrowed. "They attacked medical personnel. Deliberately, targeted them, destroyed escape pods carrying wounded patients." For a long moment said nothing. Then he asked, "What are the rules of engagement?" "Win, that's the only rule. And after, if we survive. Your sentences will be reviewed. Not pardoned, reviewed, no promises." Considered this. 38 years in a cell, maybe 30 more if he stayed, or one chance to do what he did best with permission this time. "When do we leave?" "Tomorrow." Similar conversations were happening in 11 other facilities around Earth. Soldiers who had been locked away for crimes against humanity were being offered the same deal. Most said yes immediately. A few refused, saying they had made peace with their imprisonment. But 50,000 accepted. Major Shin was one of them. She had been imprisoned for 20 years for psychological warfare crimes. She had broadcast images and sounds that drove enemy soldiers insane. Some of them were still in mental hospitals, unable to function. She had been very good at her job. Sergeant O had been locked up for 15 years. His crime was simple. He had destroyed infrastructure so thoroughly that entire regions became uninhabitable. Cities without water, hospitals without power. He had won battles by making people too desperate to fight. These were humanity's war criminals, the soldiers who had gone too far, the ones who had won battles but lost their humanity in the process. Now they were being assembled at a classified military base, 50,000 of them, wearing black uniforms without rank insignia. They were not soldiers anymore. They were weapons, weapons that had been locked in a vault for 200 years. Colonel stood before the first penal legion in a massive hangar. 5,000 men and women looked back at him. Some were old like him. Others had been young when they were imprisoned and were now middle-aged. All of them had the same look in their eyes, dangerous, capable, unbroken. "You all know why you're here," said. His voice carried across the silent hangar. "You all know what you did. You all know why society locked you away." He paused. "But now society needs you again." He brought up a hologram showing the destruction of the sanctuary. He showed them the medical ship breaking apart, the escape pods being destroyed, the bodies floating in space. "They killed healers," said simply. "They attacked people who carried no weapons, people who were trying to save lives on both sides of the battle." He looked across the assembled soldiers. "We're going to make them regret that decision." Major Shin stood in the second row. She raised her hand. "Colonel, what are our limitations?" "We don't target civilians. We don't use biological or nuclear weapons. Everything else is approved." Another hand went up. "Rules of engagement with prisoners. Treat them according to standard military protocols. We're here to break the military, not to become like them." Sergeant O called out, "What about infrastructure?" "Military infrastructure is fair game. Destroy anything that helps them make war." Smile was cold. "Make them understand what it means to fight humanity when humanity stops being civilized." The penal legions departed Earth on unmarked transport ships. They were joined by elements of Earth's First Fleet, commanded by Admiral. Also on board were observers from the Galactic Coalition. The Council had insisted on witnesses. The lead observer was a diplomat named. He looked like a large insect, with compound eyes and multiple arms. He had never seen combat. Like most coalition species, his people had learned to resolve conflicts peacefully centuries ago. He was about to learn that humans had not. The first target was the shipyard complex at Prime. It was a massive facility that built 1/3 of the fleet. It was heavily defended with orbital weapons platforms, shield generators, and 3 full battle groups. Admiral's strategy was simple and brutal. She didn't try to disable the defenses. She didn't try to capture the facility. She simply erased it. The penal legions attacked in waves. Small ships, moving fast, carrying soldiers instead of weapons. They landed on the weapons platforms and fought hand to hand. Within 6 hours, every platform was destroyed from the inside. But it was how they fought that terrified the observers. Major Shin had set up broadcasting equipment on the command ship. As the penal legions attacked, she broadcast everything on all frequencies. The screams of dying soldiers, the sound of explosions, the begging for mercy. "What is she doing?" asked Admiral in horror. "Psychological warfare," replied calmly. "Every ship in the system can hear their people dying. They're hearing the fear, the panic. By the time we reach them, they'll already be broken." That's cruel." "Yes." Sergeant O's team landed at the main shipyard. Their objective was to destroy the construction facilities, but didn't just blow them up. That would have been too simple. Instead, he rigged the entire complex with delayed explosives. The explosion started small. One dock destroyed. The workers ran to evacuate. Then another explosion blocking their escape route. Then another and another, each one timed to maximize fear and confusion. The shipyard didn't just explode. It died slowly, piece by piece, with everyone inside knowing they couldn't escape. When the penal legions, after 6 hours, the prime facility was gone. 40% of the shipbuilding capacity was destroyed. But more importantly, The psychological damage was done. Every in the system had heard their people die. They had heard the humans laughing. They had heard Major's final broadcast. This is what happens when you attack our healers. We're just getting started. On the observer ship was writing his report with shaking hands. He had never seen warfare like this. The coalition fought battles with tactics and strategy. They tried to minimize casualties. They followed rules. The humans weren't following any rules. Admiral said quietly, "Your soldiers are committing atrocities." "No," corrected him. "They're using tactics that would be atrocities if used against a civilized enemy. They declared themselves uncivilized when they attacked the sanctuary. These tactics are now appropriate." "How can you say that? You're destroying lives." "They destroyed 847 lives," said coldly. Medical personnel who had dedicated their existence to saving others said that helping the wounded was weakness. We're showing him what real weakness looks like. She gestured to the tactical display. "Look at the fleet. Look at their formations. Do you see how they're pulling back? Do you see how their communications are filled with panic? We've fought one battle and already they're afraid." Fear is not victory. Fear is exactly victory. War isn't about killing the most enemies. It's about breaking their will to fight. The penal legions understand this. They learned it the hard way, fighting each other on Earth. Colonel returned to the command ship with his team. They had lost 30 soldiers in the attack, 50,000 minus 30, acceptable losses by military standards. But knew these weren't normal military standards. His soldiers had fought with a brutality that shocked even him, and he had seen terrible things in his career. "Colonel," said one of his officers, "they are broadcasting. They're calling us monsters." Smiled. "Good. Let them think we're monsters. Monsters are feared. Feared enemies make mistakes." He walked to the observation deck where Lieutenant and Nurse were watching. They had volunteered to come with the fleet to see justice done for their fallen. "Is this justice?" asked quietly. She had seen the broadcast. She had heard the screams. "I don't know," admitted. "But it's consequences. They broke the rules. Now they learn why we have rules in the first place." Looked at the colonel. "Are you going to stop? When they surrender, when they hand over every officer who was involved in attacking your ship, when they promise to never touch another medical vessel." Eyes were hard. "Until then, we're going to show them what war looks like when humans stop pretending to be civilized." The penal legions moved to their next target. Behind them, the prime system burned. And across space, military commanders watched the recordings and felt something their species had rarely experienced. True fear. The Galactic Coalition Council met in emergency session for the 5th time in 2 weeks. Council Prime looked exhausted. Her blue skin had lost its color. She hadn't slept properly since the human penal legions began their campaign. On the holographic display, reports came in constantly. The Empire was collapsing. Not slowly, not gradually. It was falling apart like a building with its foundation destroyed. "The humans have captured the mining colony at," reported one delegate. "They didn't occupy it. They poisoned the water supply with a harmless but traceable chemical. The humans could have used real poison. They're terrified." Another delegate stood. "The agricultural world has been attacked. The humans destroyed every automated farming system. The world can't sustain its population anymore. They'll have to evacuate millions of civilians." "How many casualties?" asked quietly. "None. The humans evacuated the civilians themselves before destroying the systems." This was the pattern. The penal legions weren't killing civilians. They were doing something worse. They were showing exactly how much damage they could cause, while holding back just enough to make it clear they were choosing to show mercy. Every attack said the same thing: "We could do worse. We're choosing not to, this time." Lieutenant watched the reports from her station on the EDS Deterrence, a standard Earth military vessel. She wasn't part of the penal legions. She was a regular officer in Earth's fleet, and she was starting to feel sick. She had joined the military to defend Earth, to protect people, but what her people were doing to the didn't feel like defense. It felt like revenge dressed up as justice. "Lieutenant," said her captain, "you look troubled." "Sir, with respect, are we still the good guys?" The captain was quiet for a moment. "I don't know anymore, but I know this: they attacked our medical ship. They killed unarmed healers. Someone has to answer for that." "But this," gestured to the tactical display showing infrastructure collapsing across 3-star systems. "This isn't just punishment, this is destruction." "Yes," the captain agreed. "It is, and that's the point. The galaxy needs to see what happens when you break the most important rule of war, when you attack those who help the wounded." Sat in his command center and watched his empire burn. He had been so confident when he ordered the attack on the sanctuary. Medical ships were weakness. Showing mercy to enemies was foolish. He had believed the other commanders would see his strength and follow his example. Instead, they had turned on him. Said one of his few remaining loyal officers, "The Fourth Fleet has surrendered to the humans. They're demanding we hand you over as part of the terms." Slammed his fist on the console. "Cowards, all of them. Sir, we've lost 40% of our military capacity. The humans aren't even occupying our worlds. They're just destroying our ability to make war. In another week, we won't have a military at all. Then we fight with civilian ships." "Sir, the civilians are protesting. There are riots in the capital. They're saying you brought this on us. They're saying we should never have attacked the medical ship." Stood and paced. He had studied human warfare. He knew they had rules, rules about prisoners, rules about civilians, rules about medical personnel. He had thought those rules made them weak. He had been wrong. The rules didn't make humans weak. The rules made them tolerable. When you broke the rules, you discovered what they were like without them. And what they were like without rules was terrifying. Council Prime finally contacted Admiral directly. The conversation was broadcast to the entire Coalition Council. "Admiral, you must stop," pleaded. "They are broken. They're ready to surrender." "Are they ready to hand over?" Admiral asked coldly. "They're negotiating." "Negotiating?" His voice went hard. "Council Prime, they murdered 847 of our people. They targeted medical personnel deliberately. There's nothing to negotiate. They will surrender unconditionally and hand over every officer involved in the attack, or we will continue." "But you're destroying worlds." "We're destroying military infrastructure. Every civilian has been evacuated safely. Every water supply we poisoned was poisoned with a harmless marker. We could have killed millions. We've killed none." Leaned forward. "We're showing what mercy looks like from people they tried to kill. That's more mercy than they showed our medical team." Was crying now. Humans had taught her what tears were in their first years with the Coalition. Now she understood why humans cried. "Please," she whispered, "you're scaring the entire galaxy." "Good," Admiral replied. "Let them be scared. Let every species in the galaxy see what happens when you attack medical personnel. Let them understand that humanity will follow every rule of war, right up until you break those rules first. Then all bets are off." The transmission ended. Nurse sat in her quarters on the command ship trying to sleep. She couldn't. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Dr. Park pushing her toward the door. She heard the explosion. She felt the heat. She had wanted justice for her friends, for her captain, for the 847 crew members of the sanctuary. But was this justice, or was it just revenge with better organization? A knock on her door interrupted her thoughts. It was Lieutenant. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "No." They sat together in silence for a while, finally spoke. "I visited the Penal Legion barracks today. I met Colonel." "What did you think of him?" "He's polite, professional. He asked about the crew of the sanctuary. He wanted to know their names, what they did, who they were. She paused. Then I looked at his service record. He destroyed 12 cities, killed thousands of civilians, and now he's doing this in our names, in the names of our dead friends. Nodded slowly. I've been thinking about that too. We wanted them to pay for what they did, but I never imagined it would look like this. Should we say something, ask them to stop? I don't know, admitted. Part of me wants to. Part of me thinks they haven't gone far enough. They killed our friends and they were laughing about it. They said medical care was weakness. Wiped her eyes. Dr. Park always said that the measure of civilization was how you treated those who couldn't fight back. The wounded, the sick, the helpless. She looked at. What does it say about us that we're using monsters to punish monsters? Before could answer, alarm sounded throughout the ship. Attention all personnel, came Admiral's voice. The Empire has executed 20 human prisoners of war in response to our latest attack. All personnel to battle stations. The penal legions are authorized to proceed without restraint to the. This war ends now. And looked at each other in horror. The restraint was gone. The mercy, as brutal as it had been, was over. Colonel received the order and called his officers together. Major Shin, Sergeant O, and a dozen others. They executed prisoners, said simply. That was a mistake. New orders, asked. We were operating under rules, unspoken rules, but rules. Don't kill civilians. Don't use the worst weapons. Show them we're better than they are. His face was stone. They just threw those rules away. They killed prisoners of war. They escalated. So what do we do? Asked. We show them what human warfare looks like when humans stop showing restraint. The penal legions moved toward the. The fleet was massive now, reinforced by regular Earth military units who were angry about the prisoner executions. Even the soldiers who had been uncomfortable with the penal legion tactics were now fully committed. Finally understood what he had done. He had attacked a medical ship and started a war. He had executed prisoners and removed the last barrier between his people and humanity's true capacity for warfare. His own people understood this too. They weren't soldiers. They were civilians who had trusted their military to protect them. Now that military had provoked an enemy that fought like demons and showed mercy only when it suited them. The riots in the capital weren't riots anymore. They were a revolution. And in the command center, his own officers were looking at him with hate in their eyes. You did this, one of them said. You brought the humans down on us. I did what was necessary, started. You attacked healers, the officer screamed. You made us into monsters, and now monsters are coming for us. Outside, the human fleet was visible in the sky. 50,000 penal legion soldiers, another 200,000 regular military personnel, all of them ready to end this war. The transmission came from Admiral. It was broadcast on every frequency, to every on the. You have 6 hours to surrender and every officer involved in the sanctuary attack. You have 6 hours to surrender unconditionally. If you do not comply, we will land troops. We will take what we want. And we will show you what happens when you kill prisoners of war. The message was clear, simple, final. On the command ship, Nurse asked Lieutenant the question again. Is this what we wanted? Watched the fleet prepare for landing. He thought about Captain Lee Minyu dying at his post, about Dr. Park pushing to safety with her last action, about 847 people who had dedicated their lives to healing others. I don't know if it's what we wanted, he said quietly, but it's what they earned. The 6 hours passed slowly for the. Every minute felt like an hour. Every hour felt like a day. The human fleet hung in orbit, silent and waiting. 50,000 penal legion soldiers stood ready in their transport ships. Behind them, the full might of Earth's first fleet cast shadows across the planet. Sat alone in his command center. His officers had left him. His guards had abandoned their posts. Through the windows he could see the capital city below, Crowds filled the streets. They weren't cheering for him. They were demanding he surrender himself. A communication came through. It was from his own government. The civilian leaders who had once praised his strength now spoke with voices full of fear. You are hereby relieved of command. Surrender yourself to the human forces immediately. Wanted to refuse. He wanted to fight. But when he looked at the tactical display, he saw the truth. The Empire had no military left. The humans had destroyed it piece by piece, not with overwhelming force, but with surgical precision and psychological terror. He had started this war by attacking people who carried no weapons. Now he was helpless before people who carried too many. 2 hours before the deadline, security forces entered the command center. They weren't there to protect. They were there to arrest him. By order of the Civilian Council, said the lead officer, you are under arrest for crimes against the people and violations of Galactic Coalition law. Stood slowly. He was still a soldier. He would face this with dignity, even if he had earned none. They bound him and led him to a transport. Within an hour, he was on a shuttle heading toward the human fleet. With him were 127 other officers who had been part of the attack on the sanctuary. On the command ship, Admiral watched the shuttles approach. Beside her stood Colonel, Lieutenant, and Nurse. They're surrendering, whispered. She had expected more fighting, more death. They're practical, Admiral said. They understand they've lost. They understand that fighting further will only make things worse. The shuttles docked. Prisoners were led into the brig. Walked among them, his head still high despite his chains. Colonel watched them pass. These were warriors who had thought themselves strong, who had thought medical personnel were weakness, who had learned too late what real strength looked like. What happens now? Asked. Now we give them what they never gave the sanctuary, Admiral said. A fair trial. The trial took place on a neutral coalition station. The entire galaxy watched. Judges from a dozen different species presided. Human prosecutors presented evidence. Defense attorneys argued for their clients. But the evidence was overwhelming. Video footage from the sanctuary showed the attack clearly. Communications logs proved it was deliberate. Own words condemning medical care as weakness were played for everyone to hear. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Every detail was examined. Every piece of evidence was questioned. The humans wanted no doubt about the guilt of those on trial. Colonel attended every day of the trial. He sat in the gallery with other members of the penal legions. It was strange, he thought, watching other war criminals be judged. He had been on trial once too. He had been convicted. He had spent 38 years in a cell. Now he was watching others face the same process. The difference was that these criminals had attacked people who couldn't fight back. His crimes, terrible as they were, had been against enemy soldiers. These had murdered healers. On the final day, the judges delivered their verdict, and 43 senior officers were found guilty of war crimes. They were sentenced to life imprisonment. 84 junior officers were found guilty of following illegal orders. Their sentences varied from 10 to 50 years. Council Prime addressed the court. Let this serve as a reminder to every species in the Galactic Coalition. Medical personnel are protected. Those who heal the wounded are sacred. Any species, any military, any commander who violates this principle will face justice. She paused. The humans have shown us why these rules exist. They have shown us what happens when rules are broken. Let us never forget these lessons. Admiral stood to address the court as well. Humanity created rules of war because we learned what happens without them. We learned that wars without rules become wars without end. We learned that protecting the innocent, the wounded, and the healers is what separates civilization from barbarism. She looked directly at. You thought our mercy was weakness. You learned it was strength. You thought our rules made us vulnerable. You learned they protected you from what we're capable of without them. The trial ended. The sentences were carried out. The prisoners were taken to coalition facilities where they would serve their time. The penal legions returned to Earth. They landed at the same classified military base where they had assembled months ago. 50,000 soldiers minus 317 who had died in the campaign. Acceptable losses by military standards. Unbearable losses by human standards. They assembled in the same hangar where Colonel had first addressed them. This time, it was General Nam who spoke. "You were convicted of war crimes," he began. "You were imprisoned because civilized society could not accept what you did. Then we asked you to do those things again. We asked you to be monsters so that monsters would understand consequences." The hangar was silent. "You succeeded. The Empire is broken. Medical ships across the galaxy are now safer because species understand what happens when they're attacked. You completed your mission." General Nam paused. "Your sentences are hereby reduced by half. Those of you who had life sentences are reduced to 50 years. Those with finite sentences are reduced proportionally." There was no cheering, no celebration. These soldiers had done terrible things, even if they had done them with permission this time. "You're going back to your cells," General Nam continued. "But you're going back as people who served when called. You're going back knowing that when humanity needed you, you answered. That doesn't erase what you did before, but it matters." Colonel returned to his cell in Facility 7. It looked exactly the same bed, the same small window, the same walls he had stared at for 38 years. Now he would stare at them for 19 more. But something had changed. He had been a war criminal. Now he was a war criminal who had done one good thing. One terrible, brutal, necessary good thing. It didn't redeem him, but it meant something. Major Shin returned to her cell thinking about the psychological warfare she had waged against the screams she had broadcast, the fear she had created. It was the same thing she had done to human enemies years ago, the same thing that had gotten her imprisoned. The difference was that this time her victims had started the war by killing healers. Did that make it right? She didn't know, but it made it different. On the new sanctuary, Nurse reported for duty. The coalition had rebuilt the medical ship, bigger and better than before. It had the same name, the same mission, the same commitment to healing anyone who needed help. 847 names were engraved on a memorial wall in the main corridor. Captain Lee Minyu, Dr. Park, all the others who had died doing what they believed in. Touched Dr. Park's name gently. "We got justice for you," she whispered. "I don't know if you would have approved of how we got it, but we got it." Lieutenant had transferred to the new sanctuary as well. He was security chief now, promoted because of his experience. He stood beside at the memorial. "Do you think they would be proud of us?" asked. "I don't know," admitted. Captain Minyu believed in following rules. Dr. Park believed in healing everyone, even enemies. "What we did," he trailed off. "What we did was necessary," said a voice behind them. They turned to see Ambassador Han. He had come to the sanctuary for its recommissioning ceremony. "Was it?" asked. "We unleashed war criminals. We showed the galaxy the worst parts of humanity." "Yes," Han agreed. "But we showed them why those parts exist. Rules of war aren't just pretty words. They're barriers we built to contain our own capacity for violence. They broke down those barriers. We had to show them what was on the other side." And now asked. "Now the galaxy understands. Medical ships are sacred. The healers are protected. Anyone who violates this principle knows what will happen." Han looked at the memorial wall. "Your friends didn't die for nothing. They died protecting the principle that healing matters more than fighting. We honored that principle by making sure their killers faced justice." The sanctuary launched on its first mission a week later. A border skirmish between two minor species had left wounded on both sides. The white ship with red crosses jumped into the system, broadcasting its medical status. Both sides immediately stopped firing. and allowed the sanctuary to do its work. In the Galactic Coalition Council chamber, a new protocol was being voted on. It was called the Sanctuary Protocol, named after the ship that had been destroyed. It expanded protections for medical personnel. It established clear consequences for violations. It created special courts to handle violations quickly and fairly. The protocol passed unanimously. Even species that had opposed humanity's military response voted for it. They had seen what happened when medical ships were attacked. They didn't want to risk it happening again. Dr. the Human Historian addressed the council one final time. For 300 years you maintained peace through diplomacy and economics. That worked because everyone agreed to follow the same rules. But rules only work when everyone follows them. When someone breaks the rules, there must be consequences. Real consequences, terrible consequences. She paused. Humanity taught you that lesson. We pray you never forget it. We pray we never have to teach it again. Council Prime stood and bowed to the human delegation. It was a gesture her species rarely made, reserved for moments of deep respect. We have learned, she said simply. We have learned why you created rules of war. We have learned why you imprisoned those who broke them. And we have learned why you released them when someone else broke the rules first. These are hard lessons, but necessary ones. On Earth, deep in Facility 7, Colonel sat in his cell and looked at the small window. Through it, he could see a piece of sky. He would see that sky for 19 more years. Then he would be released. He thought about the officers sitting in their own cells across the galaxy. They had 19 years or more as well. They had learned what he had learned decades ago, that winning battles the wrong way was worse than losing them the right way. But they had also learned something new, something he had just learned himself, that sometimes the monsters were necessary, that sometimes breaking the rules was the only way to enforce them. It was a terrible truth, but truth didn't care about being comfortable. The penal legions had returned to their cells. The war criminals had been imprisoned. Justice had been served. But more importantly, a message had been sent to every species in the galaxy. Humanity will follow your rules. Humanity will be civilized. Humanity will show mercy and compassion. But if you attack those who heal, if you target those who carry no weapons, if you break the most sacred rules of war, then humanity will show you why those rules exist in the first place. They will show you what they're capable of without rules. And they will make sure you never forget. The galaxy had learned. Medical ships would never be attacked again, not because species were more civilized now, but because they understood what civilization was protecting them from. Humanity's capacity for both infinite mercy and terrible retribution. And in the end, that was the most human thing of all.